Evening all, let's continue our look at the evolution of chess style and check another Alekhine game. This one's very special. It was against an opponent called NN. Now many people would think NN is no name. Actually it doesn't mean that. I checked this on chessgames.com. It's actually an abbreviation for the Latin nomen nesco, which means I do not know the name. So apparently this game was played in Moscow 1915, but it's not clear if the game was actually created by Alexander, out of his imagination. I know many of you were very much enjoyed the quadruple pawn game I showed from one of my bullet games recently. This game's very special in the number of queens that promoted. It reminds me a bit of this game Defender, which Planetoid on BBC Micro years ago. My brother was an expert at that, and in that there's a sort of the Space Invaders. If you didn't shoot them, they became mutants, and it's a bit like that. There was like Mutant Land. This game is like Mutant Land, and there's so many queens, it's unbelievable. It's an unbelievable scenario. So how on earth did this unbelievable scenario of multiple queens occur? Well, let's see. E4 was played, or created, or based on a previous game that year. It could have been the game Alekhine versus Grigoriev, played in Moscow 1915. But let's get on. So French defence. After d4, d5, knight c3, mainline winner territory, but knight f6 is classical, not the pin, with bishop b4, but a major alternative is just knight f6, inviting white to close the centre. So now bishop g5, and this is now the McCutcheon variation, bishop b4, this counter pin. There's other alternatives, of course. Bishop e7 is very popular. D takes e4 is like my burn variation. I continue with bishop e7 after. But bishop b4 is a very interesting, very powerful move as well. After e5, the move h6 is a very, very good resource for black. And actually, I remember this Raymond Lutzenberg or something. He was the webmaster of a correspondence server which disappeared a few years back, called Chess Friends, but I remember him talking about this, and he was an expert correspondence player, and I remember him saying about this variation. In fact, I may have played him actually on Chess World at some point, and but I remember him saying about this variation and saying it's very good for black, because usually now after e takes, you don't mind at all white taking on g7 here, because you get a lot of counterplay. Or do you with black with rook g8? Is black's position really good? And I think after those comments, I never really considered this variation for white. I'm not really sure how playable it is. It looks as though white's gonna lose that pawn. It's gonna be a big problem. Once black starts exerting pressure on the centre. Black seems to have an active position, but this move seems good. If you do reach this position, you do try this variation, this move next does seem very good, h4. It seems very logical, because the idea is you're either, if rook g7 you get a dangerous passed pawn, or just hg and you're threatening all sorts of things. In fact, hg might be the stronger move. So g takes h4 gives the opportunity now for white to protect this pawn with queen g4. So we're setting the scene up for this immensely interesting scenario of multiple queens occurring, because this advanced pawn on g7, what does it need? It needs a fellow passed pawn next to it. So how does that happen? After bishop e7, which protects that pawn, white's faced with a practical difficulty how to make progress here. Okay, so g3. Because now if hg, then rook h8 is going to be really powerful, and how would black defend the g8 rook? So black, I don't think, could take on g3. Plays c5, just trying to undermine the centre. But now we have that scene now set for two connected passed pawns after g takes h4. But what's happening here on the centre and on the queen side? these are usually like pressure points for black to pressure white. And we're going to see now black's counterattack immediately with c takes d4. Now here, I think if queen takes d4, then there may be bishop f6, and then white would lose the important passed pawn. So instead, white now sacrifices brilliantly the whole knight to have this dangerous 2 passed pawn scenario to make sure that happens. He just plays h5. So sacrificing the whole knight on c3, and he's got his dangerous 2 connected passed pawn scenario now. But black continues to munch, and by taking on b2, also the king's still stranded in the centre, so surely you think queen a5 check's going to be very powerful as well. Is white just really, you know, banking on these 2 connected passed pawns? Well, after rook b1, this next move is very powerful, queen a5, and after king e2, I think, you know, engine analysis was done here against this fictional game. A lot of engine analysis. I think it was analysed by Kasparov in his great predecessor's book. But in that series, actually, Kasparov had employed a first category analyst, of course, you know, an engine user, and you know, fantastic resources can be found if you clinically go through these games. And there happens to be a fantastic resource here, which would have broken up the double, you know, the connected passed pawns here. The resource, I don't know if I give you 10 seconds, you want to try and spot it. Okay, I'll give you 10 seconds starting from now. What resource would damage white's passed pawns? 10 seconds starting from now. Okay, bishop f8 would be a remarkable move. So giving up a bishop, counter-sacking a piece, and now you see after h7, queen c3 is quite good for eyeing that destination square, the docking square. So this would be fine for black, this kind of scenario, where there isn't this menace of the 2 connected passed pawns anymore. Okay, but that didn't happen in this game. After king e2, queen takes a2. So the 2 pawns over here are preserved, and we're going to have queenings on both sides, opposite ends of the board. You know, well, opposite sort of locations. So queen takes b1. Now the first queen, so we have 3 queen scenario now after hg. And now queen takes f7, making way for a third white queen. But black is also now queening after check. He's got the potential to queen very soon. But in this position, does a very important defensive move. Otherwise, I believe he's just going to be mated with this battery of queens with check and queen c8. That would be very unpleasant. So first, black can't queen immediately, but black plays knight c6, just sacking e6. So that's taken here with one of the queens. And now queen f4 check looks dangerous, but king b6. After check, bishop c5. So white here takes the opportunity to get a third queen with g8 queen. So we have here the equivalent of, you know, that old game Defend the Planetoid of Mutant Land almost. Look at all these queens. Have you ever seen this? Queening on both sides. So we've got now another queen from black. So 2 queens for black, and white's king's a bit, you know, potentially unsafe as well. You know, f2 is weak, so I can't easily move this queen without f2 being vulnerable. So there's some difficult problems here set for black. In fact, a lot of moves here would actually lose for white, even though white has 3 queens. It's very tricky because also, you know, there's potential for knight d4 checks. Now let's put on an engine Gabitza, and I'll just demonstrate why this position is quite tricky with concrete details. Also, of course, you'll notice that this f1 bishop's and pre as well. So we'll try some ordinary moves here and see how they might fail, even with 3 queens. So say the queen, let's do a basic blunder with queen e8, just to demonstrate f2's weak. Queen 8 takes f2 would be mate, so nothing silly like that. Queen takes d5. Black might end up better with apparently queen c to d1. I have to qualify the queens here. Takes check, knight e2, and even though black's a queen down, you know, black's got bishop e3 equalizing on queens. Queen takes e3 and king c7, because that was check. And this scenario would be, you know, a pawn up for black. So that's not a particularly good move either, this queen takes d5. Now if we go into lesser moves, they start to get significantly worse, I think. Knight e2 is not too bad yet, but say queen e2, this is a bit of a disaster now for white, because queen b to b3 check apparently, or even queen c3 check. But this one, now there'll be bishop h3 check. If rook h3, rook takes g8 check. You see, that shows some of the resources that black's got available. So the white's king is a bit exposed. So if white loses that queen on g8, could be in big trouble. So that's why there is a need, believe it or not, in this position for a precise move. And let's turn off that Kibitzer now. So there's a need for a precise move here, and the kind of double or multiple exclamation mark move given by many, you know, different annotators to this game is this one. It's the only move really which gives white a significant advantage. In all variations, black nearly totally loses outright, except for one single outrageous looking resource. But if we check some of the variations, so queen takes d5, sorry, after rook h6, let's look at bishop takes e3. This would fall to the check, because the rook is pinning that knight on c6, so queen d8 is made available as a resource. And here there's a crushing blow, rook takes c6 check, and this is like forcing mate here. So that's one scenario. So let's rewind that. So rook h6, so bishop takes e3 fells to a queen d8 check, rook takes c6, check there, check here. Very, very tactical situation. Let's look at another scenario, a5 or a6 either. Rook takes c6, well, there's a little bit of differences. King takes c6, and now here, taking here on c8 for queen e6 check is mating, because you'll note here that this bishop's covering the escape square of the king, so black has to interpose, and then we have a mate. So that doesn't work out too well either, you know, a5 in this position after rook h6. Let's look at another one, queen e4 check. Here white can take, and now not take the pawn, because there could be trouble if white takes the pawn. I think there might be a refutation in bishop g4, but let's just engine check that briefly. Here queen takes e4, I don't think it's that good. Queen takes e4, and then we've got bishop f5 discovering an attack on the queen. You see, that queen on g8 is a bit fragile. That's what it shows, and black would be better here. But the thing is, this variation is still okay. White doesn't take on e4. White plays king g3 here, so he's away from the light square bishop, you know, having a dangerous check. So now if queen takes f1, we have queen b3 check, queen a2, queen b2, and the point is to exchange off queens. So if white can be just with the queen and black with no queens, and this is easily won for white. So all these possibilities are amazing after rook at h6. So how many defenses have we seen now that fell? If we go back to this queen h6, remarkable position. So we've seen bishop e3 and a5 and queen e4. Queen takes f1 is like, I think, the official game continuation. So let's have a look here. Queen b4 check. You'll notice that both of these pieces are pinned, so immobile pieces here. Queen b5, but now there's check on d8 using the pin again on the knight. And now here queen e to a3 check, and white's getting mated. Those two queens are not helping. Sorry, white's still mating black. The black king is getting mated, pardon me. So that's like the game, the brilliant game finish. So this is a stunning scenario which you wouldn't normally see in normal games, but I think it was I think a grandmaster, it might have been Jan Timman, I think, who came up with a fantastic resource here. But engines find this resource very, very quickly nowadays. Houdini finds this resource quickly. Bishop g4 check. But even in this line, white can still get an advantage after bishop g4 check. So after queen g takes g4, bishop takes e3, check. That's the key move here, to play queen e3 check and not be tempted by queen b4 check. Let's have a look at this one. If white plays queen e3, we have this scenario where white is slightly better, but it's not like totally, like clearly winning, because black has some compensation. Just get an evaluation for this position. It's like 0.48. It's slightly better for white, but that is an improvement anyway on the idea of queen b4 check here, because then black would be doing even better. After this would be just unclear, even more unclear than that variation. So anyway, so that's not so brilliant after the resource, the fantastic counter resource in this position, bishop g4. So even if this was like a compositional construction, this bishop g4 can be seen as sort of disputing the claim that it's completely winning for white after rook h6. So we have here a case of a very dramatic, hoax, one of the biggest hoax games in chess history, which Alekhine seems to have created as a figment of his creative imagination. It's got a stunning, scenario of mutant land, these multiple queens on both sides, and it's got this apparent, killer move, given lots and lots of exclamation marks by different annotators. But this deep flaw in it with this bishop g4 check resource, this bishop g4, just giving up the bishop rather spectacularly here is actually the very best move. So queen g takes queen on g file takes g4, takes, and black, even though black would be a piece down, it's not so clear, because black's got the passed pawns now potential. Okay, so it's an amazing construction, the game, and I don't know, as far as the evolution of chess style, how would this fit in? What can we say about Alexander? I've been reading and reading and reading about Alexander in the last few days, and some of it's very depressing. But it's very evident that he was one of the most enthusiastic world champions in history up until that point. He had flaws in his game in his 20s. He was, obsessed with eradicating his flaws to improve, to improve, to improve. No one had expected him later to beat Capablanca. The press, it was a sensation, press sensation. Now, his creative element was very apparent in his games, and actually Kasparov in the Great Predecessor series, says of him that he, was the first world champion with really a universal chess style, mastering, combination as well as positional play. One being the fruit of the other. The combination being the fruit of great positional groundwork, and he was very dynamic and very creative, and this creative construction is kind of evidence that he was into creating art. And I think there's some very interesting expressions which Alekhine mentioned about things like tournaments, about being a beast of prey and a monk, but also about creativity, that it's a shame sometimes the opponent doesn't put up the best moves to spoil creative compositions. Now, as a sort of, this might also though be a symptom of something else, that he might have altered creatively, apparently, his annotated games a bit, sort of emphasizing as though he saw loads more than he might have actually done. And I don't know if he's altered game scores. I don't know how rigorous the recording of games were in this era, 1915. It wasn't like modern day FIDE recording of games is on a this score sheet which goes through for double copy, etc., and both players hand it in. I don't know how rigorous things were at the time, and things were lost. So I don't know. There was this scope for making up some games, it seems, and this is one of the most magnificent kind of game forgeries. It's sometimes referred to as the Alekhine 5 Queens game. So let's look at it again. So it occurred from the French defense McCutcheon variation with this bishop b4 pin, this counter pin, and I didn't really think much of this variation after because I thought it gave black some dynamism. But this h4 move, it does seem like logical stuff. Even though the game's kind of made up. White wants these connected passed pawns, and sacrificing knight, very creatively, very dynamically, and even allowing queen a5 check. Of course, fantastic computers nowadays will find every resource the position offers. So there apparently is a resource bishop f8, okay, which would give black an advantage. But black's flow was natural, just to try and queen on that side. But white ends up now with 2 queens and soon a 3rd queen. Black's very resourceful not to lose lots of material playing that knight c6. But now this move, which was thought to be like totally winning in all variations coming up in here, rook h6, very interesting, and it's probably the only move to leave white with the advantage. So we have here a huge mass of variations. There's more background on this game at Tim Krabb's Chess Curiosities website, so I'll put a link to Tim Krabb's website in the description of this video. And also the annotation PGN is good, and I put it on Chess Post, so I'll put 2 links, so have a look at the links, and I hope you enjoyed this. Comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.